6 characters in search of an author. Italian. Sei personaggi in cerca d'autore, si personaggi in cerca d'autore, is an Italian play by Luigi Pirandello, written and first performed in 1921. An absurdist metatheatric play about the relationship among authors, their characters, and theater practitioners. It premiered at the Teatro Valle in Rome to a mixed reception, with shouts from the audience of Manicomio, Madhouse, and Incommensurabile, off the scale, a reaction to the play's illogical progression. Reception improved at subsequent performances, especially after Pirandello provided for the play's third edition, published in 1925, a foreword clarifying its structure and ideas. Luigi Pirandello, Italian. Luigi Pirandello, 28 June 1867 to the 10th of December 1936, was an Italian dramatist, novelist, poet, and short story writer whose greatest contributions were his plays. He was awarded the 1934 Nobel Prize in Literature for his almost magical power to turn psychological analysis into good theater. Pirandello's works include novels, hundreds of short stories, and about 40 plays, some of which are written in Sicilian. Pirandello's tragic farces are often seen as forerunners of the theater of the absurd. The play was given in an English translation in the West End of London in February 1922, and had its American premiere in October of that year at the Princess Theatre, New York. It is a part of metatheater, and the closely related term metadrama describes the aspects of a play that draw attention to its nature as drama or theater, or to the circumstances of its performance. Breaking the fourth wall is an example of a metatheatrical device. Metatheatrical devices may include direct address to the audience, especially in soliloquies, asides, prologues, and epilogues, expression of an awareness of the presence of the audience whether they are addressed directly or not, an acknowledgement of the fact that the people performing are actors and not actually the characters they are playing, an element whose meaning depends on the difference between the represented time and place of the drama, the fictional world, and the time and place of its theatrical presentation, the reality of the theater event, plays within plays, or masks, spectacles, or other forms of performance within the drama, references to acting, theater, dramatic writing, spectatorship, and the frequently employed metaphor according to which all the world's a stage, theatrum mundi, scenes involving eavesdropping or other situations in which one or several characters observe another or others, such that the former relate to the behavior of the latter as if it were a staged performance for their benefit. The words metatheater and metadrama combine theater or drama with the Greek prefix meta, which implies a level beyond the subject that it qualifies. It is also related to absurdism. Absurdism is the philosophical theory that existence in general is absurd, meaning that the world lacks meaning or a higher purpose and is not fully intelligible by reason. The term absurd has a specific sense in the context of absurdism. It refers to a conflict or a discrepancy between two things, but there are several disagreements about their exact nature. These disagreements have various consequences for whether absurdism is true and for the arguments cited in favor and against it. Popular accounts characterize the conflict as a collision between rational man and an irrational universe, between intention and outcome, or between subjective assessment and objective worth. An important aspect of absurdism is its claim that the world as a whole is absurd. It differs in this regard from the less global thesis that some particular situations, persons, or phases in life are absurd. Various components of the absurd are discussed in the academic literature, and different theorists frequently concentrate their definition and research on different components. On the practical level, the conflict underlying the absurd is characterized by the individual's struggle to find meaning in a meaningless world. The theoretical component, on the other hand, emphasizes more the epistemic inability of reason to penetrate and understand reality. Traditionally, the conflict is characterized as a collision between an internal component, belonging to human nature, and an external component, belonging to the nature of the world. However, some later theorists have suggested that both components may be internal, the capacity to see through the arbitrariness of any ultimate purpose, on the one hand, and the incapacity to stop caring about such purposes, on the other hand. Certain accounts also involve a metacognitive component by holding that an awareness of the conflict is necessary for the absurd to arise. Some arguments in favor of absurdism focus on the human insignificance in the universe, on the role of death, or on the implausibility or irrationality of positing an ultimate purpose. Objections to absurdism often contend that life is in fact meaningful or point out certain problematic consequences or inconsistencies of absurdism. Defenders of absurdism often complain that it does not receive the attention of professional philosophers it merits in virtue of the topic's importance and its potential psychological impact on the affected individuals in the form of existential crises. Various possible responses to deal with absurdism and its impact have been suggested. The three responses discussed in the traditional absurdist literature are suicide, religious belief in a higher purpose, and rebellion against the absurd. Of these, rebellion is usually presented as the recommended response since, unlike the other two responses, it does not escape the absurd and instead recognizes it for what it is. Later theorists have suggested additional responses, like using irony to take life less seriously or remaining ignorant of the responsible conflict. Some absurdists argue that whether and how one responds is insignificant. This is based on the idea that if nothing really matters, then the human response toward this fact does not matter either. The term, absurdism, is most closely associated with the philosophy of Albert Camus. However, important precursors and discussions of the absurd are also found in the works of Søren Kierkegaard. Absurdism is intimately related to various other concepts and theories. Its basic outlook is inspired by existentialist philosophy. However, existentialism includes additional theoretical commitments and often takes a more optimistic attitude toward the possibility of finding or creating meaning in one's life. Absurdism and nihilism share the belief that life is meaningless. But absurdists do not treat this as an isolated fact and are instead interested in the conflict between the human desire for meaning and the world's lack thereof. Being confronted with this conflict may trigger an existential crisis, in which unpleasant experiences like anxiety or depression may push the affected to find a response for dealing with the conflict. Recognizing the absence of objective meaning, however, does not preclude the conscious thinker from finding subjective meaning in arbitrary places. Summary. The characters are 1. The father, the mother, the stepdaughter, the son, the boy, the child. Madame Pace, the manager-director, leading lady, leading man, second lady, l'ingénue, juvenile lead. Other actors and actresses: property man, prompter, machinist, manager's secretary, doorkeeper, scene shifters. An acting company prepares to rehearse the play The Rules of the Game by Luigi Pirandello. As the rehearsal is about to begin, they are unexpectedly interrupted by the arrival of 6 strange people. The director of the play, furious at the interruption, demands an explanation. The father explains that they are unfinished characters in search of an author to finish their story. The director initially believes them to be mad, but as they begin to argue among themselves and reveal details of their story, he begins to listen. The father and the mother had 1 child together, the son, but they have separated and mother has had 3 children by another man, the stepdaughter, the boy and the child, a girl. The father attempted to buy sex from the stepdaughter, claiming he did not recognize her after so many years, but the stepdaughter is convinced he knew who she was the entire time. The mother walked in on the father and the stepdaughter shortly after the father's proposal and informs the stepdaughter that he is her ex-husband. They both express their disgust and outrage. While the director is not an author, he agrees to stage their story despite disbelief among the jeering actors. After a 20-minute break, the characters and the company return to the stage to perform some of the story so far. They begin to perform the scene between the stepdaughter and the father in Madame Pace's shop, which the director decides to call Scene I. The characters are very particular about the setting, wanting everything to be as realistic as possible. The director asks the actors to observe the scene because he intends for them to perform it later. This sparks the first argument between the director and the characters over the acting of the play because the characters had assumed that they would be performing it, seeing as they are the characters already. The director continues the play, but the stepdaughter has more problems with the accuracy of the setting, saying she doesn't recognize the scene. Just as the director is about to begin the scene once more, he realizes that Madame Pace is not with them. The actors watch in disbelief as the father lures her to the stage by hanging their coats and hats on racks, and Madame Pace follows, attracted by the very articles of her trade. The scene begins between Madame Pace and the stepdaughter, with Madame Pace exhorting the stepdaughter, telling her she must work as a prostitute to save the mother's job. The mother protests at having to watch the scene, but she is restrained. After the father and the stepdaughter act half of the scene, the director stops them so that the actors may perform what they have just done. The characters break into laughter as the actors try to imitate them. The actors continue, but the stepdaughter cannot contain her laughter as the actors use the wrong tones of voice and gestures. The father begins another argument with the director over the realism of the actors compared to the characters themselves. The director allows the characters to perform the rest of the scene and decides to have the rehearsals later. This time, the stepdaughter explains the rest of the scene during an argument with the director over the truth on stage. The scene culminates in an embrace between the father and the stepdaughter, which is realistically interrupted by the distressed mother. The line between reality and acting is blurred as the scene closes with the director pleased with the first act. The final act of the play begins in the garden. It is revealed that there was much arguing among the family members as the father sent for the mother, the stepdaughter, the child, the boy, and the son to come back and stay with him. The son reveals that he hates the family for sending him away and does not consider the stepdaughter or the others a part of his family. The scene ends with the child drowning in a fountain, the boy committing suicide with a revolver, and the stepdaughter running out of the theater, leaving the son, the mother, and the father on stage. The play ends with the director confused over whether it was real or not, concluding that in either case he lost a whole day over it. 6 Characters in Search of an Author is a 1921 play by the Italian writer Luigi Pirandello. The drama centers on 6 characters who interrupt a play rehearsal to ask the producer to complete their story, claiming their author never finished the play for which he created them. While the producer and actors are incredulous at first, they become fascinated by the characters' plight and are drawn into their crisis. Conflict emerges between reality and appearance as the characters and the stage company struggle to resolve the uncertainties that trouble not just the character's existence but identity itself. The play opens on a relatively empty stage where actors are arriving to rehearse a Pirandello play. When the leading man complains his costume is ridiculous, the producer shouts, "Ridiculous! Is it my fault if France won't send us any more good comedies and we are reduced to putting on Pirandello's works, where nobody understands anything, and where the author plays the fool with us all?" The producer continues to ridicule the abstruseness of the play until the theater doorkeeper announces that a party of 6 requests to meet with him. A tenuous light surrounds the 6 characters who have appeared on the stage. Together, they make up a forlorn family. The father is a plump man of about 50, while the mother, wearing a black dress and widow's veil, seems crushed and terrified. The son, age 22, appears contemptuous of the other 5 characters. Although the 18-year-old stepdaughter is dressed in mourning black, too, she has a dashing, almost impudent, beauty. The boy is her 14-year-old brother, and their 4-year-old sister is the child. The producer asks the 6 visitors to explain themselves. After disclosing that the author who created them failed to put them into a finished play, the father says the characters wish to live, if only for a moment, through the actors on stage. As there is no authoritative version of their play, the stepdaughter implores the producer to stage this drama for us at once. Although the producer suspects these characters are lunatics and orders them to leave, he grows increasingly intrigued by their story as they begin to dispute one another's accounts of it. The father claims that after he married the mother, she fell in love with his clerk and ran off with him. Their son was only 2 at the time, so the father sent him to the country, where he was raised under the care of a nurse. After completing his education, the son returned to his father's house, but the father says, he has no tie of intellect or affection binding him to me. Indeed, the son's demeanor towards his father, as well as the other characters, appears hostile. The mother and the stepdaughter contest the father's testimony. The mother accuses the father of casting her off to the clerk because he had grown bored with her. Discarded by her husband, the mother lived with the clerk for 20 years, and they had 3 children, the stepdaughter, the boy, and the child. Recently, the clerk died. The stepdaughter, however, denies the mother's account, arguing that the mother and the clerk lived in peace and happiness together. According to the stepdaughter, the mother is tortured by guilt for having abandoned her 2-year-old son, so she falsely accuses the father of pushing her into the arms of her lover. After the mother left his house, the father missed her and attempted to ingratiate himself with her children. The stepdaughter says that when she was a child, the father would approach her in the schoolyard and offer her gifts. When the clerk relocated his family outside the city to find work, the father lost track of their whereabouts. The mother and her children are wearing black because, 2 months ago, the clerk died. To support her family, the mother returned to the city, where she found a job at Madame Pace's dress shop. Behind her storefront, Madame Pace runs a brothel, and her motive for hiring the mother was to press the beautiful stepdaughter into prostitution. One day, the father appeared at the brothel, and Madame Pace sent him to a back room with the stepdaughter. At this point, the characters quarrel over what actually occurred at the brothel. The mother happened to see the father embracing the stepdaughter and shrieked. While the father maintains he didn't recognize the stepdaughter insists he knew her identity and wanted to seduce her. To resolve their dispute and determine the truth, the characters appeal to the producer to let them stage the brothel scene. Thoroughly absorbed in their drama, the producer agrees but stipulates that afterward, his actors will perform the scene again. They realize Madame Pace must be present to faithfully render the exchange, so the father entices her character to appear by assembling a collection of hats and other items in her shop. As the characters bring to life their encounter at the brothel, the prompter records their lines. The actors then take the stage, but their performance falls short of reality as the characters know it. After laughing derisively at the actors' bungled delivery of their lines, the characters reclaim the stage to present the scene properly. The stepdaughter and the father carry out their sexual encounter so authentically that the mother spontaneously shrieks, "You brute! She is my daughter." Satisfied with the dramatic effect, the producer suggests the curtain should fall at this moment, and hearing this, a stagehand drops the curtain. The play's final act takes place in the father's garden because, according to the characters, the mother and children joined his household after the brothel confrontation. Following much disagreement over how to execute the scene, they decide it will begin with the son snubbing the mother's conciliatory advances. He then enters the garden, where he sees the child's body in the fountain and the boy, who stares at his drowned sister, with a mad look in his eyes. The boy suddenly shoots himself with a revolver in his pocket, prompting the onlookers to wonder if he is dead or simply acting. The stepdaughter, cackling, runs off. As the play ends, the producer cries, "Pretense! Reality! To hell with it all!"